Welcome to the Dibley Diaries this week. This week we're thinking about not panicking, but what it means that we shouldn't panic in a situation. And in a rural community, I found that people have either grown up in a rural situation and they tend to know that they just have to get on and do some things for themselves, or if they've moved into a rural community, they know that sometimes you just need to get on with it yourself. One of the villages that I worked with had a family who had the equipment, and if it snowed, they just cleared the roads. They didn't wait for anyone to try and get to the village to do that. They just sorted it out, and people around them helped and did things to help out with that situation. Also in a rural community, there's a long history, and you can remember what's happened in the community previously and how the community has survived those things which have happened. So at the beginning of COVID, I was sitting down and we knew it was going to be bad, but I was working out how we could deploy our clergy team to sort out what we needed to with funerals and pastoral care, and how difficult that would be and how we would be able to split that between us, what would happen. And it was really interesting. As I was doing that, I was thinking, well, actually it's going to be bad, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as the Black Death. I don't think it's going to be as traumatic as the Second Civil War was, the one in the 17th century. So, we're going to be all right because our church community survived those really difficult, traumatic events, and I'm sure that we can survive this. So the long view was really helpful in thinking, well, it's difficult, but we don't need to panic. In Thought for the Week, we're going to think about Matthew chapter 24, verses 1 to 14, where Jesus is saying to everybody, just don't panic. Thought for the week this week is based on the Gospel reading for this week, which is Matthew 24 verses 1 to 14, and in it Jesus is talking about the things that will happen and that there will be really difficult things. He talks about the time between when he's talking to the disciples and the end time, and he says it's going to be hard, there's going to be wars, there's going to be hatred, there's going to be people trying to convince you that they're the Messiah. There's going to be all sorts of things which are going to go wrong. But, and then Jesus says in verse 13, if you endure, you will be saved. I'm a child of the 1970s, and just around the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s in the UK, a lot of people were listening to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was written by Douglas Adams, and it was all about a whole kind of science fiction thing where the Earth was going to be destroyed to build a bypass, but it had two kind of themes about how to be okay, that you had to not panic. So don't panic was the big theme, and the other theme was that you should always know where your towel is. I've been thinking about that in preparation for today, and I was just thinking about what life was like at the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s, in that kind of height of the Cold War, and that people really, there was nothing they could do in the event of a nuclear attack. They couldn't do anything at all, and so the advice the zeitgeist of the age was giving us was just don't panic, and some really mundane domestic advice about knowing where your towel is. Just kind of, that's all you can do. You can just carry on doing things that you're carrying on with. Jesus never promised that being a Christian would be an easy thing, or a thing which would bring you money or wealth or power. Jesus was always honest about the fact that it was going to be difficult. We've been following these chapters through in Matthew 24 for a while, and there'll be a few more readings in Matthew to come where Jesus is saying similar sorts of things, like you just need to be persistent, you need to endure, you need to be prepared, but you also need not to panic. And I wonder where you are in that at the moment, because terrible things are happening in the world at the moment, and there is a kind of propensity to panic about them. But Jesus is reassuring us, don't panic. Now, in our lectionary, which is how our readings are set, we don't get to go all the way through to the end of Matthew before we end up in Advent and the Advent and Christmas readings. But I wonder if you know what it says at the end of Matthew's Gospel. Right at the very end of Matthew chapter 28, it says, Jesus says, I will be with you until the end of the age. So Jesus is asking us to be calm, to endure, to be persistent in our faith and not to panic. And the reason we do this is because Jesus has promised to be with us right until the end times. Jesus will not leave us. He will stay with us. And that is our hope and reassurance and our reason why we should not panic. The Dibley moment of the week this week is about a situation where a rural community just got on with something which in another situation might have caused a big panic. So someone was flying from this community to a city, and they went up with what should have been a perfectly adequate electronic boarding pass, but the boarding pass wouldn't register. There was no mobile phone signal at the airport that day. There was no internet either that day. It was broken, but this person was clearly supposed to be able to get on the plane. So you can imagine how in a large city airport that would have been quite a disaster. But what happened was that the people who were putting people on the plane knew that this person should get on the plane. So they waited till everyone else had sat down and they worked out where they were supposed to be, and they just put them on the plane. They wrote them by hand on the manifest and on the load sheet. They kept their copy, they gave the other copy to the crew, and they just got on the plane and left. So, you know, it wasn't a panic, they just got on and did it. So that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week and no need to panic at all.